It's now time to hear from our first panel. Our panel now is Fundraising Challenges for 2020 and Beyond. And our moderator is Judy Levine, Executive Director of Cause Effective, and she's been with them in that role since 2006. However, she's been with the organization since 1993 and has over 30 years of experience as a nonprofit management advisor. Joining her on the panel is Keith Little, President and CEO of SCO Family Services, Kelsey Louie, on the end, Chief Executive Officer of Gay Men's Health Crisis, and Lisa Mueller, who is Director of Development and Communications at Sanctuary for Families. And of course, as usual, you all know the drill right now, details are in the kit. So I am now going to turn it over to you, Judy.
Thank you. I want to welcome our panelists. I'm going to say a little something personal about them because in Cause Effective's practice as a fundraising governance growth partner with New York's nonprofits, we have worked with each of them. I want to say about Keith, I have worked with him in his previous role, and I want to call out his patience, his foresight, and his commitment to staying the course over the long haul in a work with him on governance. Kelsey, I actually want to call out. I want to call out that you are, I think, impatient in all the right ways, which leads to GMHC being a leader in client service, I'd say. And Lisa, I'm going to call out that you really navigate a very tricky road of fundraising with pretty high stakes for a very staunchly social justice organization, and that's not an easy road to navigate. So, having said that, they all have terrific insights, and we've done some preparatory thinking about the challenges of fundraising looking forward. And we're going to start with thinking about a question that we tossed around about transparency and risk at the policy level. And I'm sure we'll get into tactics, but I've tried to steer us to that higher level of thinking about strategy and policy. And the question that we prepared to think about is, how can boards of directors create gift acceptance policies that do more than simply respond to current controversies, over what sources nonprofits will or won't accept money from, rather than saying, oops, but that actually get out ahead of today's headlines to protect their organizations from future risks. So who wants to take that one on first?
Well, since I'm the impatient one, I'll start. I like to introduce myself because it gives me another opportunity to say that my name is Kelsey Louie, and I'm the proud CEO of Gay Men's Health Crisis. Thank you for having me here. I'm very honored to be part of this panel. The other thing I should say, in this time and age, I think it's important to also identify that I'm also the son of immigrant parents. And so, to answer the question, I think it's important that that boards of directors think about these issues proactively and not in the moment. Because what happens in the moment, it becomes a test of, do we take the money? Or what do we do? And how can you argue against taking money? And so it's better to set policies where the board can be guided by a set of rules where they had the opportunity to think about this without the pressure of, do we take the money or not? So there are some elements of these policies that can make sense. And I think the most important one is, one, to make a policy where there are no strings attached to the money, or really examining what are you being asked to do in exchange for the money. Oftentimes it's putting a company's name on an event, or your logo, or some material where it'll be visible. And I think it's important to understand when you are willing to do that and when you're not. I think that's one thing that's important to do. But I also think it's important to really understand that we have a responsibility to serve the people who come to our agencies. And I don't know that we have the luxury to pick and choose on our personal values. So these policies, personal values of each particular board member, because you have many board members, and it really should be guided by a set of principles so that the organization, year after year, generation after generation, can follow standard policies.
Somebody
So
else?
I guess I'll jump in here. Good morning, everybody. I am also thrilled to be here and thrilled to see so many people in the room. This is great to have such a wonderful turnout. I'm going to echo a lot of what Kelsey said. Gift acceptance policies have been a very, very big topic at Sanctuary over the last 6 months. I know you had said we all needed to be proactive. I'll say we were sort of reactively proactive. Sanctuary, we have a gift acceptance policy, but I think as many of you may, or this may resonate, it was very technical. What do you do when you get stock? What do you do when someone gives you a car? How do you dispose of that? And it didn't really get to these values-based questions that is so hard for all of us. When do you say no? Like, nobody wants to say no. If somebody's giving you $100,000, you want to say yes. So what is it? How can you develop these guidelines that make sense for your organization, that gives you that framework to grapple with it? We had a lot of debates. We did a lot of research. When I say we, I mean our board and our senior leadership staff, looking at what was important for us in terms of our values. My personal opinion on this is there is no such thing as clean money. We live in a capitalist society, and if you look not even that deep, you are going to find an issue that somebody's going to have the issue with in terms of the money. A lot of this is time-based. I mean, I think of the Rockefellers and the Carnegies, we'd all be thrilled either to get those funds or to seek those funds. If those were new grantors today, I think we'd all have a lot of issues in terms of inequitable labor practices, extractive industries. That's challenging in terms of the source of what that money was originally. So where we ended up at Sanctuary after all of these long, long discussions were against some guiding principles that we put in place. So we at least had a framework. We don't have hard and fast rules. I mean, our hard and fast rule is say yes unless, and then have, again, a values-based framework around what is the unless. And we're looking at things like, is this going to hurt the reputation of Sanctuary? Is this going to be completely contradictory to the values that we want to uphold as an organization? I'll give you an example. We work in the gender violence space. For those of you who don't know or who haven't read the information in the folder yet, we work with gender violence survivors here in New York City. So our most recent issue on this topic was when we were offered money from an organization who had gotten money from Jeffrey Epstein. And we were going to be the recipients of that if we would say yes. And again, I'm assuming everybody knows the source of Jeffrey Epstein's money and what he was accused of, and why for an organization like mine that could be problematic. So again, we had a whole conversation around how are we going to handle that if this were public, what would that mean for us? So again, this has all led to us having guiding principles in place that are in our now newly expanded gift acceptance policy, fully adopted by the board, and so that there's a procedure, again, so that we're not in the moment making stuff up and having people's personal opinions attached to this, but really having a framework to make these decisions, in a thoughtful manner that's hopefully healthy for the organization.
I want to pull on something that you just said and then turn to you, Keith, which is if this was public, because that's one difference between these discussions now and these discussions maybe 20 years ago or 15 or even 10 years ago, was you could assume, board members could assume they could have them and closed doors, and maybe one disgruntled board member might leak or might not. And now younger board members understand everything is transparent. More longer time board members may not necessarily understand that, but that's true.
Yeah.
It's all transparent now.
Great. Good to be here. My name is Keith Little. I've been with SCO as the CEO for about 2 years now, but I've run another organization, which is where I met Judy before. So we do not have a gift acceptance policy as a board of directors. What we do have is gift acceptance discussions, because we're not at the level yet where we formulated it into policy. And one of the things that we're very, very keenly sensitive to as an organization, we've been through some tough times reputationally, and so our board is very much focused on reputational risk and exposure. And so they're very, very sensitive and very, very thoughtful as it relates to engaging in a partnership, and when you're accepting money, you're really engaging in a partnership, engaging in partnerships that may cast a bad light on the organization. Having said that, I think one of the things that I realized in my travels as it relates to fundraising and as it relates to gift acceptance policies, it all emanates from getting the right board members with the right beliefs and values on your board of directors. So it starts at the time of recruitment and making sure that board of directors individually are aligned with mission, vision, belief systems. And so during my time there, I walked into an organization where there were about 15 board members. And during the 2 years, I've been able to work with my chairperson, and we've recruited 6 additional board members. And we put a lot of thought into the idea of what do we want in terms of board members. Obviously, you want people who bring diverse experience. The other piece you want someone who can meet your give-get policies, which is important. But the third piece that we found that is real important is to really look at values and beliefs. And do they align with the organization and where the organization is going? And more importantly, do they align with what's happening externally outside of SCF? Because there's a lot of things going on. Social justice, race equity, improprieties, fair treatment, immigration. So we have spent a great deal of time being judicious and highly selective in terms of new board members, and we're subtly trying to make sure that our older board members, or our senior board members, I should say, are in line with where we see ourselves going as an organization.
That's so interesting because as I was hearing all of you talk, I was thinking about, there's this policy level, that you can check off on the 990. Do you have the policy? And then there's a level of board member to board member conversation and board member to staff member conversation that, Keith, you just hit on, because it is about personal values that then get carried out in a conversation. And then it's actually people setting policy. And that goes right into the next conversation about who are these people and how are you cultivating a set of shared organizational values. So the next question is about the shifting nature of leadership in the nonprofit sector and how does that affect fundraising. So, how is the changing of the guard of nonprofit leadership, both voluntary at the board level as well as at the staff level? It's generational, it's racial, it's cultural, it's demographic. How does that transform where and how nonprofits are finding support and who's raising money on their behalf? So Kelsey, I'm going to...
Sure. So at Gay Men's Health Crisis, our board of directors, like many, is populated mostly with, I'm trying to find the right word, older. Is this being recorded?
Yes, it is.
There's the cameras.
Love you guys. Older, not old, older, white, in GMHC's case, gay men. And it's something that this board has looked at in terms of diversity. And what we learned is it's not enough to just look at diversity. Looking at diversity and putting it on the agenda isn't enough. And so over the years, we've learned by trial and error what we need to do in order to achieve diversity and inclusion, because our donors are changing, and our donors need to change, and in order to meet those changes, the people who are fundraising need to change too. And so with the changes in leadership, so one thing that GMHC has done well is hire leaders of color and also women. So GMHC has done well on the executive staff side. However, on the board side, it hasn't done so well. But there needs to be a commitment to diversity and inclusion at the board level, I would say the executive staff level, and with the development staff, because the people who are donating are changing. And I think it's important that you are able to have a diversity of donors, and you need to be able to speak to their wishes and what they would like to donate to. And we need to connect with them on many different levels. I think nowadays, especially with younger donors, it's no longer enough to have a cause that the young folks are interested in. In some of the research that we've done, comparing our long-term donors to our younger donors, we see that we have one class of donors who have been donating to GMHC for decades. And we also see, on the other hand, that newer donors haven't been sticking with us. And when we're able to track where they're donating, they are moving from cause to cause, agency to agency. And it's something that, if you want to keep your fundraising levels up, your organization, board, and staff will have to come up with a strategy to meet that challenge.
Cool. Keith?
Sure. So I'm going to address that twofold. So when I was being recruited to the organization, I went through a 5-month recruitment process and multiple interviews. And I noticed in the interviews that all of the people that were interviewing me were white. And those people were members of the board of directors. And so at the end of that process, I got offered the job. And I think one of the things that I realized by the board of directors, because the entire board of directors was white, was that they had to make decisions on, A, was I competent, and B, and I think this is important as it relates to fundraising, is how would a black man taking over a very large organization impact business? Because at the end of the day, we're a very large organization with stable base both in Long Island and New York City. And so board of directors, because they have governance and they have fiduciary responsibilities, naturally they have to talk about how a new director might impact the business aspect of things, not just the operational aspects and the reputational, but how do they impact the business, which lends itself to fundraising. I think to their credit, they took a chance on me, and I think it's worked out well. That being said, once I was offered and accepted the job, and I kid my chairperson about this, they had a reception for me at his place, and board of directors were there, and all of my direct reports came to that. And so I noticed as I was at the event that myself and my special assistant were the only people of color. And so during the course of the evening, I went over to my board chair and casually asked him, I said, so how diverse is the board? And I was asking this because not all of the board members were there. And he looked at me very, very proudly, and he says, we're very diverse. We have males and females. And then he looked at the expression on my face, and he said, that's not what you meant, is it? And I joked with him about it because out of that conversation, about 3 weeks later, he called me up. He said, I've been thinking about what you said, and we need to diversify this board of directors. And so he said, will you help me diversify? And so we've been working for the last 2 years, and we have 2 people of color on the board, and in about 3 weeks at our next board meeting, we'll be voting in a 3rd member to our board of directors. So I think part of the message is being socially astute and having the courage to do things differently is something that board of directors need to be aware of.
So I just want to thank Keith for both of you for sharing those stories. And I think that as a white person on the panel, along with Judy, obviously, just to me, this just underscores the role that a lot of us in positions of traditional leadership have to really help move this change. I want to, I guess, go or add 2 things to the already incredibly thoughtful comments. One is, as Kelsey said, diversity is not enough. It's really inclusion. And I would go even further. thinking again what we at Sanctuary for Families have been doing as a, I will say, sort of a traditionally found in the 80s, predominantly white organization serving predominantly women of color. We've gone on our own journey and path, and what I have found incredibly helpful both personally and for our board is to really start, again, going back to philosophy and policies, is with training. Have your board go through an anti-racism training. Have your board chair go through an anti-racism training. Have your staff have it be mandatory. Get everybody to be on a platform with vocabulary and concepts that you can get behind to really drive this. Again, this is a long-term process. This is not something that, oh, check the box, I did that, I hired the African American, I'm done. That's not how this works. We know that's not how this works. So, and again, I think it is just endemic on all of us as leaders in this space. The world is changing, leaders are changing. Don just referred to this in his very thoughtful remarks in terms of what philanthropies are doing. This is where we need to go, and this is where we are going, and this is where our donors are going. This is a source of incredible opportunity for all of us, but we all need to be leaders.
And now I'm going to push you a little further and say, talk to me about how this is changing Sanctuary's fundraising.
How is it changing our fund? I mean, to me, again, this is it's a source of opportunity. If I were, and I think your comments were so painful but poignant, in terms of we as fundraisers, you're trying to match like the right person to talk to the right funder at the right time, in the right way, with the right story in order to get the gift. And unfortunately, all of us, have our biases that we bring to those conversations, and sometimes those are hard. But again, I think that the more diverse our staff is and our board is, the more opportunities we have to reach out to even more communities in even more ways and tell even more compelling stories, in an authentic way with integrity. So again, we have our efforts going on both on the staff. This is something I'm trying to drive. In terms of my development staff and giving opportunities. Again, I think we all know development is a historically white field. Trying to be mentors and offer opportunities for staff to come in. We have the efforts at the board level, as I talked about, in terms of bringing in new voices with new perspectives. And all of those things open up communities and open up new opportunities for us. So again, this is an ongoing process, but I see this as nothing but positive. And nothing that, again, just creating opportunities.
Great. So now I'm going to switch a little bit and talk about sort of donor visibility and attention span. Coming off the heels of at least the last...
Switching topics dramatically here. Yeah.
Okay, well, it's 2020. Last night's debate at least ended at 10:15 or so instead of 11:15. But, how is the expansion of political fundraising, and particularly the competition for smaller donor political fundraising, affecting how charities are presenting their causes for broader public support? What have you seen? What are you seeing? What do you forecast seeing? From here, we are almost in March. It's going to be a pretty bumpy road. What are you guys doing about it?
Maybe I'll start, because I think we've had this conversation in the last few days at my organization. Because of the political climate, both of the country and looking at the presidential and the mayoral election, we've been giving a lot of thought, particularly as it relates to honorees at our fundraising events and making sure, and so we're going through that checklist to make sure that we have individuals that we want as honorees that are somewhat neutral, whatever that means. And I guess neutral means that your politics are not too much to the right or to the left, where it's going to impact the fundraising aspects of what you want to do and keep people away from fundraising related events. And it's hard because we have 2 fundraisers coming up in the next 3 months. We have a New York City, because we're so large, we have two different audiences. We have a Long Island audience and we have a New York City audience. And so as we think about honorees, and by the way, when you have 2 events, it is a major headache. But we think about honorees who obviously can meet a give-get. And then the other part is we ask the question, what's their politics? And will their politics conflict with our donor base? Because we've had a donor base. We've been around for about 125 years. This is our 125th year. And so we have donor bases that we definitely want to continue to keep. And we have donor bases that we want to nurture and bring into the fold. And so we think a lot about what are their politics. And sometimes we shy away from individuals who have a ton of money, but we think they may turn off others and keep others from donating. So we look at the greater good as it relates to decisions that we've made.
Interesting. Well, first of all, I think this is a very relevant topic for all of us. I think, well, I just will speak personally. I have already had a number of donors say, Lisa, we love Sanctuary River Families, but this year, every single dollar that I have is going into an election campaign. So, sorry. That's the reality that we're going to live with between now and the end of the year. So, that's what we're all confronting. I think that and Keith, I'm struck by your comment. So Sanctuary is a little bit of a nonpartisan organization. So nobody wants more violence in the world, right? So we have Republican supporters, Democratic supporters. I'm sure I have Trump supporters. So again, we need to be really careful in our messaging so that we're, again, standing up for our values, but not alienating our donor base. So just being aware of that. I think that all of us have opportunities to make ourselves relevant, though, to the conversations that are going on in the political space. So again, instead of saying, oh, we have nothing to do with that right now, it's all politics and campaigning, make yourself a part of that conversation. We serve 80% immigrant clients, so immigration is a huge topic. Get yourself into that conversation. So making yourself relevant, I think, is really, really important. And then just on a practical level, speaking to the fundraisers out there, politicians are really great fundraisers. So really learn from what's going on and borrow, cheat, steal, the tactics that they use. Politics, they're really, really good at what they do in terms of bringing in money. And I think that we have a lot to learn from how politicians and how campaigns raise funds that we can use in the nonprofit sector.
Great. So thank you for that. I'm going to both endorse something you said and then challenge something you said. It's okay. So one of the things I want to lean into, so at GMHC, I think, for everybody, I think one of the things you need to do is you need to understand who your donors are and what they give to. And at GMHC, we've come to understand that our donors are very political because we've had some conversations like that. All my money is going here this year. So the one thing I want to lean into that you said is that you want to make yourself and your services relevant. At GMHC, legal services for immigrants is a small piece of what we do. However, in the past several years, we've highlighted it for fundraising purposes to fire people up because these conversations around immigrants are relevant and a fiery topic. Where I am going to disagree with you is actually, so just the time out, I've been sitting here for the last half hour wondering, what did Judy mean when she called me impatient? And so but now I know, because with those, now I realize it, with those donors who have said, because I have similar donors who have said, all of my money is going to this political campaign. I said, that's wonderful, but let's not forget about the people at GMHC who are affected by those policies that will happen if the wrong person is elected. At GMHC, we have the luxury of having a pretty one-sided donor base. So we get to call out. We try to skirt the line by not calling out individual names, but we do call out when policies or actions threaten the civil liberties of the people that we serve, or the majority of the people that we serve. So we get to be a little more political than it seems like your other two organizations, and that has helped us. One way to do it, because I cannot be in a position where I'm standing, let's say, at an event like AIDS Walk that has over 20,000 people saying who I support, although it's probably obvious. But some celebrities, we are okay with having some celebrities call out politicians, and we have. So FYI, Rosie Perez is one that will always call somebody out. And by the way, AIDS Walk New York this year is May 17th, Central Park. Please join us. And so I think these are some of the things that you can do, but I think the key is to understand who your donors are, and then lean into what they're willing to do and give towards, and push them. Push them a little further when they say they might not have enough this year.
Okay, so here's my last question, and then we'll go to audience questions, which is, you are all fairly well-resourced organizations, although you may not feel that way. There could always be more, but there are many smaller organizations here in the room. So, how can smaller organizations with, more ingenuity than cash to invest successfully tackle these issues? What would you suggest if there were one or two priorities?
Well, I'll go first. To me, it's not necessarily identifying, oh, you should do X or Y. It's that you should have priorities. Someone told me years ago when I first starting, there are every day so many good ideas, and all of us want to be doing, the to-do list of, oh, that's great, or oh, this is a great opportunity. And if you try and do everything, you are going to fail. So if you're not saying no to at least one good idea a day, you're not doing your job. We all have to prioritize. No matter how well-resourced we seem, we don't have enough. The need is endless. Our clients need more help. So really having a plan and prioritizing and learning to say no, even when something seems really, really compelling and you think you need to do it, that's going to help you stay focused on getting the stuff that you are prioritizing done, and done in a really effective way.
So before I spill the water,
Oh.
I think it applies to smaller organizations or larger organizations. A couple of things that pop to mind for an organization. Number one is to understand that fundraising is a partnership, and there's probably three entities in my mind to a partnership. One would be obviously the CEO or the executive director, because besides being operationally responsible, they do have a responsibility in terms of fundraising. Two would be obviously the board. The board's there for governance, they're there for fiduciary oversight, but they're definitely there for fundraising. And the third part is with your head of institutional advancement or fundraising. And so if all of them are working in unison and you have a plan, then you will do well. If they're not working in unison, then you have a problem. If any of those are weak links. I think the other part is that you need to understand your audience. Because I think a lot of times, and I think early in my career, when I started to do fundraising, I didn't necessarily have a plan. And then I didn't understand my audience. And your audience may be different, and you may have different audiences, but understanding that where are the soft spots to your audience and being able to appeal to those. And then the third part for me, and I've learned this probably better over the last 2 years than I ever have in my career, is you have the opportunity to sell the organization, but that doesn't always work. Being SEO and saying I'm SEO and can you donate money is not necessarily the most prudent I've found. I think you need to find out what service that you provide resonates with the audience that you're looking at, so that whether it's services related to multi-generational poverty or related to social justice or related to immigrations, and you have services that you provide, and they're aligned with some of the beliefs and value systems of the donor audience that you're approaching, is probably more of a prudent approach. And then the last part for me was what I've realized, and I talk about this with my vice president for institutional advancement, as I think about going out and doing fundraising, for me, and this is not for my board, and not for my institutional advancement VP, but I take the strategy, am I selling the product, which is the services that we have, or are there instances where I sell myself? Because what I found in my travels, there are times where donors, they're going to buy into a service, they have an affinity to a service. There are times they may not be as in tune with the service, but they like you as an individual, and you can sell them on yourself and what you bring to the table. And you need to be able to differentiate your audience and how you alter your strategy.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
So if I had some tips for all of you, I would say listen to what Keith and Lisa just said. So thank you for that. Those are very smart. I'll add to that. I think it's important, I mentioned this earlier, that you use the data that you have to understand who your donors are, something Keith mentioned. Understand what they give to, what programs they give to, why they give, when they give, how often they give, how much they give. And this can give you some insight. So for example, at GMHC, we did another review of all of our donors, and there is a large number of donors who are actually, the average number of donors who started donating 10 years ago, the average age is 72. Average, which means there are some older than 72. So we decided to really invest and prioritize our legacy gift giving. And we also realized that we are trying to go after some younger donors. And so another tip that you can do is you want to make sure that your website is mobile friendly, because every young person, actually everybody, is using their devices now. And so that's that's a concrete thing that you might be able to do. Also, think about why people come to your events. We knew, for example, AIDS Walk, I'm being a dead horse, right? AIDS Walk, May 17th. AIDS Walk, we have thousands and thousands of people who attend, and people come for so many reasons. I don't know that anybody comes because it's a fun, sexy event. So what did we do? We tried to make it fun and sexy. We have a post-walk show that has drag queens and celebrities performing for those to make it fun. Yes, it can be a somber day for some, and a day of remembrance, but it also can be a day of celebration. And so we wanted to attract people who might just want to have fun at one of our fundraisers. And then broadly speaking, what you can do is, because in the meantime, while you're doing all of your other work, is you can really focus on outcomes. I think a lot of times we talk about what our organization does. At GMHC, we serve 90,000 hot meals. But I think it could be more valuable, and we do this, if you can talk about, as a result of those 90,000 hot meals, what happens? So at GMHC, we say, as a result of those 90,000 hot meals, there has been a 23% decrease in depressive symptoms. 92% of the clients in our meals program are virally suppressed, an indicator of health if you're HIV positive. And so I think donors care about these things, and so you might want to do that work also so that you could speak to that, not just saying what you do.
Great. Okay, so we have many, many questions here, and I'll do my best to lump a few together. I'm going to start with something we didn't get to talk about on the prepared questions, which is gathering together folks like a fundraising council or fundraising volunteers to help you reach out to donors. And do any of you do that? How do you select who you do? Does that help you reach younger donors? How do you organize it? How, does it help you get to more diverse donors?
Can I tell you what not to do?
Yeah.
And maybe in that you'll find something to do. So we, at GMHC, we thought, let's do that. Let's get a young council, a junior board, and let's organize this, and that could expand our donor base and appeal to younger people, and they'll come up with a fun, sexy event. And this is where we learned that a lot of younger donors kind of move around from cause to cause. But what happened?
If you could talk about why, that would
Sure.
get another card done.
Sure. And because I think what happens is because I think it's just, I don't think it's specific to fundraising. I think it's just the world we live in, the lack of attention span, the next shiny thing. People, I don't like to blame everything on millennialism. I'll blame some things on it. But the idea that there are just so many causes and so many things to give to, I think creates that. But so we decided to form this young persons group, a young board, a young donor base to attract younger donors. And who did we have staff it? An older staff person on the development team, an older board member, and it just didn't work. And so, I mean, it sounds so obvious, But our head of development, we thought this was such an important project, let's put our head of development on it, who was an older gentleman. And then we picked a board member who wanted to do it, because you want to get buy-in. He was an older person. It didn't work. I think both elements. And so, so that's what not to do.
So funny.
Any?
I will say, I mean, to me, the world is sort of divided into two types of people who love fundraising and people who loathe fundraising, and you cannot get them to do that. And I think, based on my experience, trying to get a body together whose goal is to fundraise is not the right starting point. So what we have, we really start with engagement. So to me, you're looking for ambassadors, you're looking for people who believe in your mission, and you're looking for people to get so committed they get that this mission needs resources and they're willing to get over that hurdle and start asking for money. So what we do is we have multiple, I call them sort of thematically grouped volunteers. So we have a group of people who really care about the work of our legal center. And they come to a meeting every other month and they get to hear from the head of the legal center and they get to hear a compelling story or a case or a piece of legislation that we're trying to pass. That is their engagement. And we have similar structures for parents who have kids that want to get the kids involved in their philanthropy. We have a group that's focused on what we call our economic empowerment program. So people who will be ambassadors and help our clients get jobs, just open doors for them. We have a group that's focused on our clinical program. Essentially, there's a lot of programs. So we try and break ourselves down into themes that will engage people, that's a little bit easier to latch onto, and get them connected, get them to meet each other, get them connected to program and our clients ideally, and get them, again, so compelled they can't help but want to raise money. So that has worked quite well for us. And brings in, again, a diversity of professions, a diversity of interests, and a diversity of people that leads to much larger networks for us to then tap into.
Well, and it makes complete sense, because we always talk about people don't want to fundraise because they love fundraising. Well, about 5% of people who fundraise love
Maybe
fundraising.
2%, yeah.
The rest fundraise because they're so compelled about the mission,
Yeah.
and they want it to happen. And so you're creating mission-centered nodes that then are compelled to make this work happen. Keith, any thoughts?
Yeah, so, like Kelsey, we about a year and a half ago, we started what we call an advisory council, which is synonymous with probably a junior board. Most of the individuals that are part of it, and we're up to about 16 individuals that are part of it, are 40 or under and have that energy. And the thought was that not everybody wants to be a board member. They don't want the responsibility, they don't want the headaches, or they don't have the money to be a board member. So the idea with the advisory council was probably 3 different buckets. One would be to help spread the word about SEO through their networks. The second part is we have a major focus on corporate partnerships, which we haven't done a good job of in most of our existence, and so we have a focused effort on that. And then the third part is they do what we call mini fundraising. And so the idea, and they do it without the pressure of being a board member. So there's no give-get, but there's an opportunity for them through their circles to have events or to bring their circle of friends to the agency-sponsored big events like the galas and the golf tournaments and things like that. And so it's so far it's been fun and it's picked up a little bit of steam. We're not there yet, but that's probably the best way that we're engaging a different age group, so to speak.
Can I add something? I just realized something that organizations can do is really think about the pricing of your events. This is something that GMHC did. When we looked at our donors, we noticed that we had a large number of donors, thousands of donors who give less than $250. But all of our events were priced at over $250. And so there was no event that was accessible to this group of people who were willing to, who has proven that they were willing to give money to GMHC, but no events. The gala is $1,000, October 7th, by the way.
It's a very good marketer over there.
Our cabaret is June 21st, is $250, and so there aren't any events that are accessible to younger folks. So our dance-a-thon will be priced at under $100, a date TBA, but look out for it.
So we have a couple of questions that have to do with sort of starting out. One as a smaller nonprofit with very low fundraising. Another one as starting a development plan from scratch. So what key actions in terms of board and staff would you prioritize?
Try that one.
As the head of a development department.
Yeah.
Where do you start? Well, first of all, the internet is your friend, right? Do not try and write a development plan from scratch. There are a million models out there. So find either a colleague at an organization that has one, or go online. I'm sure the Better Business Bureau has models. Like, use a model. Don't start from scratch. In terms of staffing, it's so hard. I had the benefit of coming to Sanctuary where there was already at least a small team. Again, we're now a bigger team. But my heart goes out to anybody who is the development department of one, and you're trying to do the government applications and the foundation applications and get the corporation sponsorships and plan your gala and do your annual appeal and keep your CEO happy. It's daunting as I say that out loud. So I think that volunteers can be really helpful to bring in people who, again, care and are privileged to be in a position where they can volunteer their time and not need a paycheck necessarily, at least from the get-go. As I think all of us have alluded to or said directly, your board is so key. Try and get a board in that can help both, manage initially, and then also, really critical is fundraising. So. Again, it's hard. It is really, really hard. I don't think I have a magic solution to make your solo development department person happy. But it's, you got to start somewhere. And again, just being creative in your resources and going back to, again, have a plan, stick to the plan, say no a lot. That will, I think, get you at least on the right footing.
I was just thinking about what Lisa was saying as it relates to the board. And one of the critical things that all organizations need to do as part of a development plan is they need to put a special focus on their board, because it's easy for a board to say, well, you've got a development department, why don't they do the work? And I think it takes a mindset and it takes a culture to develop a board of directors that understands that development is an inherent part of their responsibilities. And it's not just on the executive director, and it's not just up on your development director or VP. And so that's real critical.
Okay, so can I ask you also to dive into that? Into your relationship with your board and how you motivate them from behind?
Can we turn off the cameras?
Yeah, we could have a whole panel, right, on boards and motivating boards. I guess I'll start.
Specifically with fundraising.
I'm incredibly fortunate that I've been at Sanctuary a long time, 15 years, and I inherited a culture of a very engaged board. So again, I know one of the lucky ones. I have access to my board. I meet with my board president once a week. We have trainings around development for board members. We have an enforced give-get policy. I mean, we have a lot of stuff in place that I know a lot of groups don't. How do you start that culture, I think, is such an interesting question. When you don't have the culture, how you change that culture to get there. I think, again, leadership is so important. You have to have an executive director or CEO who is encouraging the board to behave that way, and ideally a board chair or president or whatever that title is called to really lead. And to, again, find your development chairs who care and that you can befriend and motivate. But again, there have been books written on this topic, how to engage your board in fundraising. So those are a few thoughts.
Those are great ideas. Somebody said to me, so I can't take credit for it, but somebody said to me that you have to treat your board members like donors. So oftentimes we will bend over backwards to get something from our donors, and we put our boards in a different category. But when somebody taught me that, it gave me a different mindset, because while I do get frustrated with donors, I treat them in a very different way. And so when I started treating my board as if they were major donors, it changed my mindset. And so at GMHC, I think this is safe to say, you'll know if I have a job in about a month. I think it's safe to say that one of the things we had to do in order to change the culture was to change the board members. Sometimes to change culture, you have to change the people on the board, especially those who are actively working against the culture that you want. Now, no one person can do it yourself. This is where you partner with one or two board members that agree with you. You get an amazing consultant like Judy to help, and you slowly, and you be patient, and this is my problem, she called me patient because I couldn't wait. And sometimes you have to wait it out for a few members to term off, and then you slowly start to turn the tide. You consistently talk about it. You talk about it even when they don't want to talk about it. You raise it, and you can't give up. And I think because organizations will endure, and you need to and culture change takes a long time. And it also helps if you can get your staff involved. I often say everybody's second job is fundraising. And sometimes that just means being a good ambassador of your program, or finding pathways to fundraise, or identifying a donor, or going to the gala and speaking to a donor. And so if you can create a culture of fundraising at your organization, the board will slowly catch on.
Can I add two quick things too? Wanted just to underscore one thing Kelsey said, expectations are so key. When you're bringing on those new board members, in the nomination process or the cultivation process, whatever you have, talk about this, talk about your give-get. I think the worst is when a board member is so excited to come on board and gets voted on, and they come to the first meeting and there's like, oh, surprise, we have a give-get. And like, wait a sec, I didn't sign up for this. So make sure they know what they're signing up for and what your expectations are of them. And then, going back to this, not everybody loves fundraising, even though they know they have to do it, they might not want to do it, and they might not think they know how to do it. So it's our job as staff is to train them. Give them the tools, write them the templates, make it as easy as possible. I always say my job is to make this as fun and painless for you, dear board members, as possible. So let's have a dialogue. You know, if you like in-person meetings, let's do that. If you like emails, let's figure that out. But you need to make it as user-friendly for them as possible, and don't assume that they know what they're doing or that they want to be doing that necessarily.
I'm gonna echo what Lisa and Kelsey spoke about, but there's one other piece, and it's a subtlety. So what we do is we have a board development committee, and we have board development committee meetings. And we also have our quarterly board of directors meetings. What we have done is we subtly and respectfully, we produce give-get reports. So at any point during the year, all board members, not just committee members, but all board members see what all of the other board members are giving and getting. And it's subtle, but it's effective.
That's not subtle at all. That's a sledgehammer.
And then
Good for you.
what we do is with those board members that tend to be lagging behind, my VP for development reaches out and says, hey, Keith, we're at the mid-year point and you're a little bit behind. How can I help you increase your give-get to the organization? So we think of strategies. They'll talk with them about looking at their circle. Who's in your circle? How can we reach out? Do you want me to talk with them to sell the organization? So it's both doing a report, but it's also saying, how can we help you?
All right, well, on that note, which I applaud you, that's quite public. And, you know, Cause Effective works with over 100 organizations a year, and I would say maybe many of them, by the time we're done with them, do that report. But I would say the amount of organizations where everybody sees it, maybe 5. So if you're in the top 5%, go.
We'll add GMHC to that list because they're getting that report too.
All right, okay. All right. So, in conclusion, I'll just say it's about strategy. It's about foresight. As we always say at Cause Effective, development is not just about tactics. It's really a strategic management function, and it's certainly, in 2020, it's about taking a deep breath and looking ahead. So. A lot of the stuff they talked about, look at Cause Effective's website, call us. We're a nonprofit and we're here for you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. This panel was terrific. And we're going to move right into our next one. But I do want to say one thing. As far as development plans go, while the BBB does not have one of our own per se, we have a lot of funders. They all have plans. The other thing I'll say is that I really focused in on what was said about having programs be accessible. All right, even just look at this room. One of the things that our board on the Education Foundation decided a long time ago was that we wanted to be sure that our programs were underwritten in a way that allowed all of you to be here without money being an obstacle. So that is something that all of you can be looking at when you're deciding how you bring in revenue, how you bring in fundraising. Be sure it's diversified, and be sure that if your board wants to, you have ways of doing it so money might not be an obstacle for those that are so passionate about your organization.